Good morning and welcome to ICA's online service. Before we get started, here's a few things you might want to know. Annual business meeting is coming up on April 16th at 6:15 p.m. via Zoom. If you're an official member of ICA, be sure to join us that day online. Resurrection Sunday is almost here. We will celebrate Easter Sunday on April 9th. Mark your calendars and invite your friends. Our next mission trip will be to Bachan on May 1st through 5th and will be for men only. The cost is 5 juta and registration will close on April 16th. So men, sign up today and let's build the kingdom. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ICA's online service. I'm Pastor JV, one of the pastors here, and we're excited to have you with us today as we celebrate Good Friday, a day that changes the destinies of all of humanity. Wherever you are today, I hope you're settled in, you've got your coffee, you've had your breakfast, and you're ready to get started here with us today. Our series that we're in is titled Miracles, and today we're going to talk about the miracle of forgiveness, which is what Jesus brings us on this Good Friday. So what is Good Friday? It is the last day of Jesus' life on earth when he faced his greatest trials and his greatest struggles. It is often called the Passion of the Christ because it was the time that he endured his highest difficulties for you and for me. And the story of the last day of Jesus is brought to us through the scriptures in the Gospels. The Gospels are 4 books that were written by the apostles and by eyewitnesses of the events that took place at that time. Some of them included details that others didn't include. And so as we look at all of the Gospels, we get a complete picture of what took place. And today, we're going to go through this story of what happened. We won't be able to, of course, read all of it because there's 4 Gospels and we can't look at all of that, but we're going to kind of piece our way through with parts of that as we retell the whole story. Now, the last day of Jesus' life begins with a supper. It was on the day of Passover. Passover is a very significant Jewish feast with rich symbolism that Jesus is going to fulfill. We don't have time to talk about all of that, but he gathered with his disciples for this meal. And we read in Luke 22, verse 15, it says, "He said to them, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." So Jesus knows he's about to suffer, and he's warning his disciples. Part of the Passover was the breaking of bread and the drinking of the cup of wine, and Jesus gave meaning to this when he explained it, that it represented him, that this would be his body and his blood that would be shed for them. Later today, we are going to celebrate communion together. So if you haven't got those elements, you can get those ready, your bread and your juice for the end of the service, and we're going to celebrate. Now, Jesus is sharing this with them, but also betrayal is about to take place. In verse 21, it says, "But the hand of him who is going to betray me is with mine on the table." So the story begins with fellowship and friendship, and it is going to move into sorrow and betrayal as one of Jesus' disciples is going to give him up. Now, the person who's going to betray him is a man named Judas, and we don't exactly know why Judas decided to betray Jesus. We don't know if he was trying to push a conflict between Jesus and the leaders to get Jesus to use his power to assert the kingship. Judas may very well have wanted to be a high official in that kingdom, and he was getting tired of Jesus taking too long to make things happen. And so Judas goes to betray Jesus. He goes to the Jewish leaders and says, "I'll give him up to you," and they pay 30 pieces of silver. Remember that for later. And while Judas is scheming, Jesus and the rest of the disciples are going out to a garden called Gethsemane, which means an oil press. So this was where the olives were crushed and pressed out for oil. And it's very interesting that when olives are pressed for their oil, they're pressed 3 times. There's absolutely nothing left after the third pressing. And here we see that Jesus goes to pray, and he prays 3 times. So in this place of crushing, Jesus himself is crushed. He wrestles to go forward. He actually prays that if possible, he would not have to go to the cross. But he surrenders to the will of the Father and says, not my will, but yours be done. 3 times he prays, just as the olives are pressed 3 times. So Jesus is pressed and crushed and poured out for the sake of you and I. And while he is there, Judas brings with him the high priests and their soldiers to arrest Jesus. It says in Luke 22, verse 45, when Jesus rose from prayer, he went back to his disciples. While he was speaking, a crowd came up, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him. That was a greeting during that time. People would kiss each other on the cheek as a greeting you would give to a friend. But Jesus asked him, Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss? Not only is Judas betraying Jesus, but he's doing it with a smile and a gesture reserved for a friend. It says in John 18 that the disciples tried to defend Jesus. Simon Peter had a sword, and he drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. The Apostle John knows this guy. Jesus then commands Peter, put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me? Jesus knows that God the Father desires him to walk this road. This is how he is going to save humanity. And Jesus has surrendered himself to the will of the Father. He forbids Peter from defending him. The disciples then flee. And it says in verse 12, the detachment of soldiers with his commander and the Jewish officials arrested Jesus. They bound him and brought him first to Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. So this mock trial begins for Jesus. He's brought in, and they bring in all these accusers who are all trying to accuse Jesus of one thing or another, but nothing they say really agrees with anybody else. And so finally, these guys just get right to the point. It says, at daybreak, the council of the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the lead teachers of the law, met together. Jesus was led before them. They all asked, are you the Son of God? This is the clinch. Are you the Son of God? Are you the Messiah? Do you claim to be the Messiah? Jesus replied, you say that I am. And in that vernacular at that time, it was just a way of saying, you have said it yourself. Yes, the words have come from your own mouth. Then they said, why do we need any more testimony? We have heard it from his own lips. See, they believed it was blasphemy for Jesus to claim to be the Messiah, the Son of God. Nobody could claim to be that unless he was the true Messiah. What they're ignoring is, but is his claim correct? Jesus was a threat to their power and the position that they had. They revealed that their hearts were full of evil, even though they sat in a place of goodness. And this is something we all have to watch out for. Is leaders that appear good on the outside even sit in positions where they are meant to do good, but sometimes are filled with wickedness. And that's what these men were. So they condemn Jesus and they want to put him to death for blasphemy. However, they cannot, because at that time they were under occupation by the powers of Rome. Nobody was allowed to be put to death unless they came before a Roman court and a Roman judge made that decision. So now they know to get rid of Jesus, they're going to need to come up with a charge that the Romans will condemn Jesus for. The Romans aren't going to listen to that Jesus violated, one of our spiritual laws or says he's the Messiah. That's not going to be enough for the Romans. So they brought Jesus before a prefect named Pontius Pilate. And what they tell Pilate is that Jesus claims to be a king and that he is a troublemaker who is trying to raise a revolt. Okay, so these are charges that they're hoping they can get to stick on Jesus. You know, Pilate can tell that there's politics involved here, that maybe Jesus isn't really what these guys say he is, and for some reason they're just trying to get rid of him. So it says Pilate went in to the palace, summoned Jesus, and questioned him. Now, Pilate's concern is because the Jewish leaders are saying this man said he's the Son of God. And this started to get Pilate worried. Pilate's wife had a dream saying, have nothing to do with this righteous man. Pilate, as a Roman, believed that sometimes the gods would come down and walk in human flesh, and he didn't want to be in a position of doing something to one of the gods. So he brings Jesus in and he asks him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you say I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. I want us to remember this word. This is Jesus' mission from his own lips. The reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Pilate's answer is, what is truth? This is an incredibly significant moment because Pilate is saying what many people say today. What is truth? How do I know what is true? These statements are so relevant in our own time where truth itself more and more is under assault. We are living in a world where ideas are pushed that truth is subjective. The idea that truth is merely something that I have thought up in my mind. Whatever I imagine is now reality because I imagined it. Jesus comes into the world to assault this very idea because he is saying, no, there is an absolute truth. There is an absolute reality, and I am here to tell you what it is. We know that the devil works in deception. Deception is his greatest power. It is how he manipulates and how he moves the world is through deceiving. And where people are lied to, they either believe things that are untrue, causing them to make decisions that are harmful for themselves, or in some cases, they are forced to accept ideas that they know are untrue, even ridiculous, because they are afraid of what will happen to them if they resist those ideas. And eventually, deception can create so much confusion in the world that people don't know what is up and what is down, what is right and what is wrong, and pretty soon they will simply accept whatever they are told. It makes them open for control, and this is the power of the enemy. But Jesus has come through to break through this and to speak the truth. Jesus said, the truth will make you free. He is here to declare reality. It says that Pilate went out again to the Jews gathered there, and he said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews? He's trying to get himself out of this again. He doesn't want to be in this position he's in. And so he says, look, it's Passover. Usually I release a prisoner to you on this time. How about I release this guy? They shouted back, no, not him. Give us Barabbas. Now, Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Barabbas is an interesting person with an interesting name. He was a murderer. He was actually guilty of the things they're accusing Jesus of, creating a revolt. And his name is also Jesus. His name is Jesus Barabbas. And Barabbas means son of the Father. So this is an interesting thing. It's like the devil has set up this false Jesus, who is also called Jesus, the Son of the Father, not the true Jesus, the Son of the Father, but an imposter. And the people are demanding the murderous imposter instead of the true Christ, the man of peace. They are choosing the man of war over the man of peace. And this is a foreshadowing of something Jesus said will happen in the future. You know, when Jesus predicted the end days, there's a figure called the Antichrist. The Bible means not just opposed to Christ. Anti means false Christ, a false Messiah who will come upon the world in the last days, and he will be a prince of darkness. But humanity will follow him, will choose him over the true Prince of Peace. And so here at this moment is like a foreshadowing of that final day event. Here they're choosing the murderer, just as in the last days, humanity will follow after this false Jesus, this false son of the Father. In fact, Jesus predicted this in John 5:43, where he says, I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. But if another comes in his own name, you will receive him. And so he foretells that day when they will receive that false Messiah. And here we see it played out even at this point. So the people are demanding Barabbas. So Pilate tries to appease them again. He hands Jesus over to be beaten. He's hoping that this will satiate their bloodlust. So Jesus is beaten. The soldiers strike him and mock him. They put a crown on him made out of thorns, and they bring him back to Pilate. It says in John 19, from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. But the Jewish leaders kept shouting, if you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. Now this is going to be the final blow for Pilate. Why? The term friend of Caesar doesn't just mean Caesar's buddy. It was a political term. It meant somebody who was in good favor and loyal to the emperor. And the problem that Pilate had was that he had a friend named Sejanus. Sejanus was a right-hand man to Caesar for a long time, and Pilate was kind of a brutal ruler in Judea, and he did many things against the Jews. But the complaints never reached the ears of Caesar because Pilate was protected by Sejanus. But recently, Pilate's friend Sejanus had been charged with conspiracy and executed for treason. And so now, not only was there no protection for Pilate, but he was in danger himself as an affiliate of Sejanus of being under suspicion. And so the Jewish leaders are saying, look, what their veiled threat is that they can simply let talk get to Caesar, that here's this man who claims to be a king, who could be leading a revolt in Judea, who the Judean leaders themselves, one of their own people, they're saying, hey, this man is dangerous. We have to get rid of him. And Pilate does nothing. Pilate is less a friend of Caesar than the Jewish leaders. And even though this is untrue, Pilate is very well aware that, as the saying goes, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth even puts on its bootstraps. He can't risk the political risk to himself of being accused of not being loyal to Caesar. So it says in Luke 23, wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. For the third time he spoke to them, why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. I will have him punished and release him. But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the very things that he's afraid that he's going to be accused before Caesar of releasing a man for insurrection and murder. So he actually releases a man who's guilty of insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and he surrendered Jesus to their will. Here we see the innocence of Jesus. There is never at any point in this story a question of Jesus' innocence. The very judge who sits here recognizes that Jesus is innocent. Everyone who's bringing Jesus before them knows that he's innocent, that there's nothing that he's guilty of. And yet here we see in the world our best systems fail and justice is often corrupted. We look for justice in the world and can be disappointed that no matter how good the system is that we try to create, somehow or other, corruption and evil can come in and justice can fail. But God is promising and setting up a kingdom where mercy and justice are true. We also see here that the crowd is pressuring Pilate. He is moved by the voices of this mob. The question we can ask ourselves today is, what voices are dictating our destiny? Pilate allows the mob and the crowd to pressure him into doing things that he knows are wrong and that he knows are terrible. He tries to save himself from consequences by sacrificing an innocent man. He tries to save himself from the judgment of the crowd and is pushed into a corner where he himself does what is wrong. And today, we are in that danger as well. For there's always the voice of the mob or the voice of the crowd that is coming at us and trying to push us into its image or push or manipulate our behavior. And often it is out of fear of the mob or fear of the crowd or fear of their judgment that we ourselves can get pushed into doing things we don't want to do, believing things that we don't want to believe, or simply acquiescing to things that we know are untrue out of fear. Question we need to ask is, what voices are pushing you and I? Who are we following? What are the influences in our lives? Who do we listen to? Who is worthy to lead your life? Is it some Instagram influencer somewhere? Somebody that was born 20 years ago, and yet they're pushing you or directing you or leading you? Is it the corporations of the world with their money interests? Are those the ones that are pushing the ideas into yours and my mind? And is it politicians? The social media that we have now makes the power of the crowd and the mob greater than it ever was. We are surrounded by it. Is it our peers? Who is the voice that's leading us? And we need to ask the question, who is worthy to lead you? Jesus is claiming that he is the truth. We have to ask ourselves, who am I going to follow? Who am I going to take the advice for what's going to happen to me at the end of my life and when I die and I go into eternity and I'm going to be into eternity forever? We will spend so much more time on the other end of death than in this life. For our life is short, but eternity is long. Where am I going? Who am I going to listen to for how to live? People that want to sell me something, or someone who came from the other side and who returned there? Somebody who overcame death itself. Who is worthy to be listened to? You know, we need to look at what the fate will be of those that followed the crowd and those that followed their own voices. Judas had his eyes on worldly things, and he tried to manipulate the situation, it seems, for his own personal gain. The scripture says that when Judas discovered that Jesus was condemned, he tried to go back and make it right. He went back to the priest and said, I betrayed an innocent person. Take this money back. Take this silver back. And he threw it into the temple, into a place called the house of the potter in the temple. And the priest said, what's that to us? That's your problem. And they took his money, and they're like, well, this is blood money. We can't spend it in the temple. So they bought a field with it. And later, Judas would go and commit suicide in that field. He would hang himself. This was Judas's fate, for he listened to the voice of the enemy, the deception of the enemy. He tried to manipulate life through sinister means to accomplish his own ends. What will Pilate's fate be? Pilate will eventually put down an insurrection in Samaria, but he will be accused before the emperor of cruelty to the Samaritans. He will be called back to Rome, and the current emperor will have died. Another emperor will be there called Caligula, and Caligula will, tired of the problems that Pilate seems to create in this area of his kingdom, will have Pilate executed by suicide. Pilate will have to kill himself. So Pilate, listening to the mob, puts the great guilt on himself and never delivers himself in the end anyway. When we follow the crowd and the mob, you will never truly be able to appease them. They will turn on you in the end. And in the end, we find ourselves losing the one thing that matters, which is our own integrity. Following the crowd will lead to ruin. Don't trade your eternity for temporary acceptance by people. Don't trade your eternity for temporary acceptance by people. So Pilate hands Jesus over to be crucified, and they lead him away to a place called Golgotha. It means the place of the skull. It was a place of execution outside of the city, and there Jesus was crucified. Now, crucifixion was the form of execution in Rome. The way that they did this was they would nail a person to a cross through his hands and his feet, and the person would be left out to die of exposure and suffocation. And why suffocation? Because eventually your legs can't hold yourself up, and as your body falls, it becomes harder and harder to breathe, and the people would die. It was a humiliating way to die, and this is what they do to Jesus, and it says that he was crucified with other criminals. In Luke 23, we read, 2 other men, both criminals, were led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there, along with the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing." And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is God's Messiah, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up and mocked him. They offered him wine vinegar and said, "If you're the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was a written notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." Here we see again the character of Jesus Christ contrasted with the character of the world. All around him are those that are abusing and mocking. Even at this low point, there is no mercy or compassion. Even one of the men being crucified is angry at Jesus. Maybe he's angry because he thinks Jesus might be the Messiah and he's not doing anything to help them. You know, maybe we've had that before where God doesn't do the things that we think he should. We don't understand what he's doing. We get angry at him because he's not acting in the way we want. And yet in the midst of all this anger, Jesus' only response is love. Jesus intercedes for the very people that are hurting him. Jesus prays for them. He says, "Father, forgive them." You know, in this world, I hear a lot of people can say, "Oh, I'm a good person. You know, I don't do this bad thing. I don't do this bad thing." We can all feel like we're good people until we compare ourselves to Jesus. Jesus sets a moral standard that is higher than any other moral standard. Because as much as I might feel like I'm an okay person, I don't think that I'm at a place where I can be praying for people that are crucifying me and abusing me. I have a hard time just praying for people that cut me off on the freeway. So Jesus sets a standard. Jesus' standard of morality is the highest standard there is. Even people that don't believe in Jesus acknowledge that the moral teaching that he presents, there is no greater moral teaching in the world. That the life that Jesus lived is an impeccable life. There is no other life that we can point to with the kind of goodness and integrity of Jesus. Jesus stands apart from everyone, and he demonstrates that here, even with his forgiveness. Now, this is the account from the Gospels. This is what we get from those 4 books that were written by the apostles and by the eyewitnesses. But I want to say today that there's actually another account of this day and this moment. Another account of what happened to Jesus at this time that is outside of those 4 Gospels. And I want to read a little bit from this other account to you today about what it says about this moment. It says this: "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me. If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it, but it is you, my companion, my close friend." So we see here the betrayal of Jesus by his friend. It says, "They paid me 30 pieces of silver, and the Lord said to me, 'Throw it to the potter, the handsome price at which they valued me.'" It shows here that the one who is betrayed is God himself. "Do not stay so far from me, for trouble is near, and no one else can help me. My enemies surround me like a herd of bulls. Fierce bulls of Bashan have hemmed me in. Like lions, they open their jaws against me, roaring and tearing into their prey. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. All my bones are on display. People stare and gloat over me. They divide my clothes among them, and they cast lots for my garment. And they will look on me, the one they have pierced, and will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child. I looked for sympathy, but there was none, for comforters, but I found none. They put gall in my food and gave me vinegar for my thirst. All who see me mock me. They hurl insults, shaking their heads. He trusts in the Lord, they say. Let the Lord rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. He was despised and rejected by mankind. He was a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. We held him in low esteem. Yet, surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And by his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. For the Lord has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities, because he poured out his life into death and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and he made intercession for transgressors. And all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations will bow down before him. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. For this is the gate of the Lord, through which the righteous may enter. I will give you thanks, for you answered me and became my salvation. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. So here in this other account, we see all of the details of the crucifixion of Jesus, that he was surrounded, that his hands and feet were pierced, that they divided his clothes, that they gave him vinegar to drink. And yet, in the midst of all of his suffering, God had a purpose and a plan that Jesus would be an offering to pay for the sins of you and I. See, when you and I do evil, we incur a debt before a just God. And a just God has to return that upon us. And the punishment of sin is death, an eternal separation from God. For what is unholy cannot dwell with what is holy. And yet Jesus has come sinless and perfect to offer himself on that cross. And by paying the price of death that was due to us, he has freed us and redeemed us. And it describes here that because of this moment, this message of forgiveness will travel to the very ends of the earth. And here we sit today on the far ends of the earth, proclaiming the goodness of Jesus Christ in fulfillment of everything that was said there. Now, you may be asking, well, where is that account? If that account is not in the Gospels, where is it? And what's interesting about it is this is not an account that was written at the time of Jesus, nor was it an account that is written after Jesus. But this account was written by the Spirit of God himself through the mouths of his prophets hundreds of years before Jesus ever lived. These are the writings of the scriptures of the Old Testament. We're reading here Psalm 22, written by King David, 1,000 years before Jesus ever lived, describing the crucifixion. We are reading the words of Isaiah the prophet in Isaiah 53, where he discusses how God's Messiah would die to pay the price for our sins to make us whole. He wrote it 700 years before Jesus ever lived. We're reading Psalm 118. We're reading from the prophet Zechariah. All of these things happened hundreds and even 1,000 years before Jesus ever lived. And this is why Jesus is different. This is why Jesus comes in and says, I testify to the truth. Anybody can say that, but Jesus backs up what he says by what he does. There is no other figure in history that can say There are 1,500 years of writings foretelling everything I will do. And I have come into the world at the exact time, and I have done everything that was said that needed to be done for the deliverance of mankind. Only Jesus does this. There is no religious leader, there's no political leader, there is no prophet or wise man who can say the same. No one has the pedigree of Jesus. No one can make the claims of Jesus because no one can do what Jesus did. Jesus shows that he is unique in his fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus shows that he is unique in his sinless character. Jesus shows he is unique in his mercy and forgiveness that is beyond what human beings do. And Jesus shows that he is worthy to be followed. If we're going to follow somebody, why not Jesus? If we're going to listen to somebody in this world, who besides Jesus has this kind of credibility? Jesus doesn't ask us to blindly believe. Jesus doesn't ask us just to accept it because he said it. Jesus proves his claims by everything that he does, and there is no other person in history. Jesus not only fulfills what was written before him, but everything that Jesus said would come after him is now coming to pass. The things that Jesus said, that the gospel would start as a small little mustard seed and it would fill the world, is now coming to pass. Jesus not only can fulfill the very words of Scripture, but he proclaims the future, and it takes place. There is no one who is like Jesus. And now, as we get ready to kind of come in here to the end, we're going to look at Jesus' final miracle on the cross. The final miracle before he dies is in Luke 23:34. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." One of the criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. "Aren't you the Messiah? Save yourself and us." We read that. But here's what happens next. But the other criminal rebuked that man. "Don't you fear God?" he said. "Since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly. We are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus answered him, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Jesus' final miracle is an act of forgiveness. Jesus' final miracle is to heal a man, not of his physical wounds, but of the wounds of his soul. And Jesus demonstrates something here. You know, it echoes an earlier miracle that Jesus did where there was a man who had a withered arm, and it was a Sabbath, and the religious leaders were upset. But Jesus healed the man on the Sabbath. They were upset that he was breaking their rules. But he said, "Look, it is lawful to do good." And here in this moment, Jesus is still doing good. Jesus ministers to the soul of this man. And what did this man have? He had nothing to bring to Jesus. He had no goodness of his own. He had no righteousness of his own. His life was a life of mistakes. He had been brought to a bitter end by his bitter decisions. He comes to God with nothing, and he looks at Jesus and just says, "Please remember me." The man recognized that Jesus was good. And that is what Jesus said. "Those who are of the truth will recognize me. They will hear my voice." And this man heard his voice and just said, "Lord, remember me." And Jesus pardoned his sins. And by pardoning his sins, Jesus makes another declaration, and that Jesus Christ is God. For it is one thing to forgive somebody when they sin against me, but none of us can offer forgiveness to somebody who sins against somebody else. I can't forgive that person on your behalf. If they've sinned against you, what right do I have of letting them free from their guilt? Only God can free people from the guilt of their sins, because all sins are done unto him. And Jesus here in this final moment demonstrates his divinity and says, "This day you will be with me in paradise." Jesus is unlike any other. Pilate asked, "What is truth?" And Jesus' answer to us is, he is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life. He is here to work this final miracle of forgiveness, and he offers it to you and to me. And the Apostle Peter wrote this, "Salvation is found in no one else, For there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. Many people in the world claim to have answers, but only Jesus can back up his claims. And today, he's opening the door for you and me. And the question is, will we respond? If you don't know Jesus today, will you respond to him? Just like that man on the cross, Jesus is opening the door for you. He has given himself for you, and he is worthy of being believed. Is there any that is more worthy than Jesus? Jesus offers truth in a world of lies and deception. He offers purpose in a world of meaninglessness, justice and mercy in a world of corruption, a bright eternal future in a world of temporary pursuits. Jesus offers love in a world of selfishness, and Jesus offers himself to us. Will we respond? We find maybe we have a hard time forgiving others. We even have a hard time forgiving ourselves. Sometimes we have a hard time letting God forgive us. But the Lord is inviting us to come and be forgiven. Be forgiven. Just as the man on the cross. His promise in Psalm 118 is that this is the gate of the Lord through which the righteous may enter. Jesus has opened the door of salvation for you and I. And today, we are going to take communion together. I hope you have those elements. Let's read together what it says in 1 Corinthians 11. Paul wrote this, I pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself. On the night when he was betrayed, Jesus took some bread. He gave thanks to God for it, and he broke it in pieces and said, this is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. On Good Friday, we remember the day that Jesus was broken for you and I. He gives himself for you and I. Will we receive him? I invite you to receive today. In verse 25, it says, in the same way, he took the cup of wine after the supper. And he said, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people. It's an agreement confirmed with my blood. Jesus has died so you and I don't have to. Jesus suffered so that we could be made righteous. And he says, do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. For every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are announcing the Lord's death until he comes again. Today, we remember on Good Friday what Jesus did for us. And we also remember that he is coming again soon. May we be ready to receive him. The last verse I want to read is this. It was now about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. The curtain in the temple symbolizes separation between mankind and God because of sin. Jesus alone has torn that separation apart and opened the door for us to return into the presence of God. The Gospel of John records that Jesus cried out, it is finished. Jesus has accomplished what no other man could, and it is finished for us. He called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he said this, he breathed his last. It is finished. Jesus has done it. And if you have received him, the finished work of forgiveness and a new life is given to you and to me as well. Let's pray. Lord, we give thanks to you today as we celebrate Good Friday and as we remember this day of your suffering and your hardship, Lord, and that you loved us enough to give yourself for us. You loved us enough to suffer for us. You gave your life to take the punishment that was due us, and you've opened that way for us to return to you. There may be people out there that feel that separation between you and them. They feel the shame of their guilt. The enemy lures us into sin and then condemns us when we do it. We feel our own failures. We fail to live up to our own expectations, let alone yours. And sometimes that can keep us from you. But just like that man on the cross, Lord, you aren't looking at those things. You look at us with love and you are offering your redemption. Lord, we give thanks to you. And my prayer is for everyone out there. If you're hearing the voice of the Lord in your heart, say yes. There is nothing you have done that can keep you from the mercy of God if you will say yes to Jesus Christ, because in him it is truly finished. Lord, we pray your blessing now today on your people. Be with us this Good Friday and as we go into Easter. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen, church. I want to thank you so much for celebrating with us here. I hope you come and join us here on Sunday for Easter as we see the next great miracle, the greatest miracle of all that Jesus is going to do. And we'll see you then. God bless.
Thank you for joining us today at ICA Online. We hope you had a great Sunday, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Annual business meeting is coming up on April 16th at 6:15 p.m. via Zoom. If you're an official member of ICA, be sure to join us that day online. Resurrection Sunday is almost here. We will celebrate Easter Sunday on April 9th. Mark your calendars and invite your friends. Our next mission trip will be to Bachan on May 1st through 5th and will be for men only. The cost is 5 juta and registration will close on April 16th. So men, sign up today and let's build the kingdom. ICA is looking for volunteers to help us with our service media ministry. This includes service directors, lighting and sound, and LCD operators. We're also looking for help with worship in the West and hospitality in the East. Check the QR code to see other opportunities and sign up to start serving at ICA. Small groups are the best way to get connected and meet people at ICA. If you are not yet part of a small group, visit our website or the Church Center app and check out what group might be right for you to join, and sign up and get connected today. Giving to the ministry at ICA is easier than ever. Just scan the QR code with your mobile banking app or enter the account number on screen to make a transfer. Your generosity is what makes the ministry at ICA possible. If you need prayer, we want to pray together with you. Visit bit.ly/ICA Prayer Online and let's believe God together for a breakthrough in your life. ICA online prayer service happens every Tuesday night at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. Check our social media on Tuesdays for the Zoom link information and gather with us to worship and pray together. ICA has services every Sunday in person and online on our YouTube channel at ICA Surabaya. Service times at our West Campus and online are at 8 a.m. for Bahasa and 10 a.m. for English. At our East Campus, our Bahasa service is at 8 a.m. and our English services are at 9:15 and 11 a.m. Join us each Sunday to worship and grow together. Follow ICA social media on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. There you will find important information, devotions, playlists, and interesting content and updates for you.